Waddle, but Giannis driving into traffic.
Giannis Antetokounmpo is still playing at an elite level, but the Milwaukee Bucks are not. As of late March, they're 29-45 and sitting 11th in the East, effectively on the outside of the playoff picture with a negative point differential and multiple blowout losses on their recent record. Giannis is putting up strong all-around numbers and remains the clear focal point of the team, yet the results around him have slipped to the point where the national conversation has shifted from how far can they go to what made this team fall apart so dramatically. Milwaukee's season is a case study in how a team can decline around an elite superstar. The Bucks' record, their on-court issues, and their relatively quiet approach at the trade deadline all point to deeper problems with how the roster has been built around Giannis. Instead of looking like a coherent contender, the group around him often resembles a rotating cast that doesn't consistently complement his strengths on either end of the floor. Taken together, it paints a clearer picture of how a franchise can slide from perennial threat in the East to a shell of their former selves in just a few seasons, and what the next few years might realistically look like for both Giannis and the Bucks as they try to decide whether to double down, retool, or consider more drastic changes. Not that long ago, the Bucks were one of the most feared teams in the league. They stacked up multiple 50-plus win seasons, consistently finished near the top of the Eastern Conference, and backed it up with strong point differentials that reflected a true contender rather than a team just scraping by. Their defensive metrics during those peak years were usually among the league's best, built around a clear formula: Giannis at the center, plus size, rim protection, and veterans who could defend and space the floor. Over the last few seasons, that foundation has slowly eroded. Key role players from the title run like Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday have moved on or traded to other teams, coaching changes have disrupted continuity, and the overall talent and fit around Giannis have slipped, raising questions on what direction the team is headed. As the personnel changed, so did the numbers. The defense drifted from elite toward average, the net rating narrowed, and the Bucks started to look less like a lock for 50 wins and more like a middle-tier team. The current 29-45 record and 11th place spot in the East are the clearest snapshot of that decline, showing how far they've fallen from their previous standard. Once you zoom in from the big picture slide to the actual roster, the pattern gets pretty simple. Giannis is producing at an elite level, and the pieces around him aren't consistently good enough to lift the team with him. He's still the engine of everything they do. In 36 games this season, he's averaging 27.6 points, 9.8 rebounds, and 5.4 assists, but the support structure has shifted from the older, clear number 2 and veteran role players model into something more scattered. On the perimeter, a lot of responsibility has fallen on guards like Kevin Porter Jr. and Ryan Rollins to create offense, handle the ball, and take pressure off Giannis as a primary initiator. On the wings and in the front court, you have rotation guys being asked to fill gaps that used to belong to higher-end starters or proven playoff contributors. Night to night, someone might pop for 20+, but it's rarely the same player for multiple games in a row, and there isn't a steady, all-star caliber second option that opponents are forced to game plan around. That shows up in how the team actually looks on the floor. Usage and touches are spread across players who project more as complementary pieces than true co-stars, which makes the offense heavily dependent on Giannis bending the defense every possession. When your best player is still performing at a high level and the overall results look like this, it usually says more about how the roster is built than about the star at the top. A big part of Milwaukee's story this year is how often they simply haven't been competitive. They come into late March at 29-45, with a point differential of about -6 points per game, one of the worst marks in the league, which lines up with the eye test of frequent double-digit losses. The 130-91 home loss to Orlando, where Paolo Banchero scored 33 and the Magic never trailed, is a clear example of how quickly games can get away from them when things start to slip. Defensively, they've fallen from their old identity to roughly league average or slightly below, allowing around 115 to 116 points per 100 possessions, which puts them in the middle of the pack rather than the top tier they used to occupy. When Giannis plays, he can still cover a lot of ground and clean up mistakes, but when he sits, opponents get into the paint more easily, and the Bucks give up the kind of big runs that decide games early. The result is a schedule dotted with blowouts like the Magic game, where Milwaukee was down 12 at halftime and trailed by over 30 before the fourth quarter even started. On offense, the inconsistency mirrors the defense. Their overall scoring sits in the lower half of the league, and the negative point differential shows that whatever they're producing on that end isn't enough to offset their defensive problems. When your net rating and individual game results look like this, it's less about bad luck and more about the underlying quality and fit of the team. When you look at how the roster has changed over the last few years, a lot of Milwaukee's current problems trace back to the front office. The original Giannis era formula was clear: size, defense, rim protection, and reliable veterans around a dominant superstar. As pieces from that core have moved on or aged out, the Bucks haven't consistently replaced them with players who bring the same two-way impact. Instead, the team has drifted toward a roster that's lighter on plus defenders and more dependent on streaky scoring from role players. The most recent trade deadline highlighted that issue. From the outside, this season looked like a clear decision point year. The record was poor, the defense had slipped, and the depth chart had obvious gaps. That's usually when serious contenders either make a strong move to shore up weaknesses or start repositioning for a different timeline. Milwaukee's moves, or lack of them, didn't change the structure of the team in any meaningful way. They stayed roughly the same group with the same flaws heading into the stretch run. Taken together, it creates a picture of a franchise that hasn't fully committed to a clear direction. They haven't gone all in with aggressive upgrades, but they also haven't stepped back to reset around Giannis with a different supporting cast. That in-between status is a big reason why the Bucks no longer look like the organized, identity-strong contender they were a few seasons ago. All of this hits differently because of who Giannis is and where he is in his career. He's not a young prospect learning how to win or an aging star hanging on. He's in the middle of what should be prime contention years. His box score production, efficiency, and impact still line up with the standards you expect from a player who can be the best guy on a championship team. That makes the gap between his level and the team's results even harder to ignore. From a purely basketball standpoint, every season spent outside the contender tier is a missed opportunity. You don't get many years where your best player is both physically dominant and experienced enough to navigate the playoffs. When those years coincide with losing records, blowout losses, and constant questions about fit and identity, it raises fair concerns about how the organization is managing the window it has. This doesn't automatically mean Giannis is about to force his way out, and it doesn't mean the relationship between player and franchise is broken. But it does change the context around everything Milwaukee does. Each front office decision, each offseason, and each trade deadline now carries the extra weight of, does this put the Bucks back on a real path to contention while Giannis is still at this level? If the answer keeps looking like no, the pressure for bigger changes only grows.
Pass inside to Giannis, spins, count the bucket, and one coming for the Greek Freak.
Every season, the pattern around Giannis and trade talk looks almost identical, and this year fit that template again. The Bucks struggle more than people expected, the roster around him doesn't fully convince anyone, and as the trade deadline approaches, the conversation ramps up. Should Milwaukee consider drastic changes, and could that eventually include moving Giannis himself? The debates pop up on TV segments, podcasts, and social media timelines, with people sketching out imaginary trade packages and possible destinations. But when the deadline actually arrives, nothing close to that level ever happens. Milwaukee might shuffle around role players or make minor adjustments, yet the core dynamic stays the same. Giannis remains in place, the organization publicly commits to building around him, and the blockbuster Giannis trade everyone spent weeks talking about never materializes.
Spin. Oh! Body bucket and one for Giannis.
The cycle then resets. By the time the next season's struggles or disappointments appear, the same questions and rumors start resurfacing, even though the previous deadlines ended without major movement. That repetition is important context. It shows how much of the Giannis trade chatter is more about outside frustration with the Bucks' direction than any real indication that a deal is imminent. Putting all of this together, Milwaukee's future comes down to a few realistic paths rather than simple optimism. One option is to double down around Giannis, aggressively pursue upgrades, even if it costs future picks or young players, to rebuild a roster that looks and plays more like the old defense-first, veteran-heavy Bucks. That route assumes the front office can find enough reliable pieces and that ownership is willing to pay the price to keep the window open. Another option is a softer retool, where they accept that the current construction has topped out but try to pivot without fully stepping back. That might mean reshaping the supporting cast over multiple seasons, targeting players who better match Giannis' strengths and the style the coaching staff wants to play. It's a slower route and risks more years in the middle. The most drastic option is the one nobody in Milwaukee wants to consider, but has to be acknowledged. There's a point where, if the team can't get back to contention, exploring major moves, up to and including a future without Giannis, becomes part of the conversation. The current season doesn't force that decision immediately, but it does make it clear that the status quo isn't working. Whatever path they choose next will define not just the end of Giannis' prime, but what this era of Bucks basketball ultimately becomes known for. If you made it this far, leave a like and let us know in the comments. Do you think this is Giannis' last season in Cream City, or can the Bucks still turn this around?